JoJolion was the first ever long-running manga that I read for a really long time. I've been reading this series ever since I was in high school, which at this point would be around 5 to 6 years of my life I've been following this story. And I just finished the final chapter of JoJolion, finishing my half a decade long journey reading this story. And I just really wanted to get my thoughts out about this topic because I'm a really big fan of JoJo's, and I just wanted to sort of appreciate the story even though I wasn't the biggest fan of it all the way through. So I just wanted to get my thoughts out about the story as it stands in my head immediately after finishing it. So hopefully you enjoy my thoughts, because I've been really wanting to make this video ever since I learned that JoJolion was ending rather soon. So hopefully you enjoy. To start, I just wanted to focus on some specific aspects of the story that I personally was never the biggest fan of, and I think going from there, I'll talk about what I liked about how Araki ended the story, and basically what I thought of the part as a whole. So I just wanted to focus first on the character of Josuke. I always thought he had a really interesting ability and a premise that I was relatively interested in, because he had such a great conflict with many other people in the part, specifically with Jobin. Josuke's entire motivation and Jobin's motivation directly contrast one another, where Josuke's trying to find out the truth using this fruit, and Jobin is just trying to ensure that the family can have enough money selling this fruit, doing whatever means necessary. It made it feel as though there was a great deal of contrast between the two, which is why I always assumed, ever since the story was really building up, that Jobin would be the main confrontation that Josuke would have to face in order for him to truly figure out who he is and what he was. Now, Araki obviously took that in a very different way when the latter half of the story was being built up with the head doctor, but personally, the head doctor wasn't the worst it could have been. I did think it was pretty compelling with this massive sense of mystery, very similar to part 4, which of course it's very similar since this is meant to be the alternate version of that story. And I thought having the head doctor be this head of this massive organization, in contrast to a lone serial killer, was also a neat touch. However, I really just wanted to point out that my opinions on the latter half of the story are very, very low, in my opinion. I feel as though many of the arcs don't actually move the story along in a satisfying way, and it's all just stepping stones leading to the head doctor, who, personally, I was never that invested in because we were not introduced to his character at an earlier point in the story. I feel as though if this character was alluded to, or even mentioned earlier on in the story, like he is assumedly shown at the end, where he's been a looming force ever present in Yasuo's life and many other characters' lives, I feel as though I would have had a great sense of shock and really strong attachment to this character. But at the end of the story, I felt as though the connection was forced, and personally, I would have preferred if Jobin, someone we've known since the beginning of the story, was the main villain. But obviously, Araki went a different way, and I'm not totally against it. It's just not something I personally enjoyed, because it felt like a rather stark contrast and a rather abrupt, oh, this is the main villain? Personally, when Toru was first introduced, I didn't even know he would be the main villain. I thought he was going to be the main build-up to the main villain, not him being the main villain himself, because of his abrupt introduction. So those are my thoughts on Toru and the main villain debate / controversy that I have with this story. The next thing I would like to discuss is the sort of Deus Ex Machina-esque ability that Josuke was able to develop at the end. I felt like that was very, very forced and very annoying, because like I said early on, the main thing I liked about Josuke was his ability to take something away from anyone. It could be their friction, their eyesight, their memories. I thought it was an incredibly interesting ability and had a ton of potential, especially in action. Now, having that ability basically go unused in the final section of the story with the big bad villain, I felt like just was a very big disappointment. I don't know how else to say it. I feel like Araki wrote an ability with a ton of variation and uniqueness to it that literally he could have done anything with, but to have the reveal of, oh, your ability that you've known this entire part was not that ability, personally, I felt was annoying. I'm just going to be straight up. I thought it was kind of annoying because there were just so many aspects of that ability that I found compelling, especially when used in many unique ways, like I said, and just to have it revealed to be something completely different and be essentially a golden experience requiem type moment, I thought was disappointing because I feel like that ability was really well utilized, and many previous parts have had characters use their abilities in unique ways as it has continued onward. Specifically, I was going to bring up Josuke Part 4 because I feel as though him learning to shoot projectiles and sort of bring them back using Crazy Diamond was a really unique way to build up his ability, and I don't know. I feel as though having Josuke Part 8 have some realization like that, not having it be, oh, it's actually a different ability altogether, would have been more satisfying, in my opinion. I have a few other things I would like to bring up before talking about the actual end of the part, and two of them are related to the characters Josuke is kind of in this journey with. The first I would like to bring up is Yasuo. I really enjoyed Yasuo as a character early on in the story, but throughout the latter half, it felt as though every single time she was in danger and she was going to die. I cannot even remember the amount of times that Araki has basically put Yasuo in a death scenario, and I just genuinely did not care because I was so used to seeing her in the worst circumstances ever and coming out totally fine. It almost felt as though Araki, who is known for his really gory and gruesome death scenes that really are supposed to hit, was being really kind of schlocky. And honestly, close relation to this channel, very much like Oda is in regards to death. I feel as though Oda does the same kind of thing where he teases at a death and tries to make it seem really emotionally impactful for the reader, but when it's revealed they don't actually die, it takes away a lot of that emotion, makes it feel cheap. And Yasuo having many moments of that happening felt cheap in my opinion. Now the last thing I'm going to bring up in the negatives was my overall impression that the Higashikata family, who was built up very early on to be these important characters in the story, were not really that important in the long run. I felt as though many of them were basically pushed to the side, specifically Hato and Daya. They were basically irrelevant, I would say, throughout a major portion of the story, only being used to either be an antagonist early on or bring other characters into the story through relation to them. They themselves, I felt, didn't have much impact in the story whatsoever. But bouncing off of that specific point of family, I would say that Araki has some really good themes going on in this part, specifically with the concept of identity and family. Now, I wanted to focus on family first since I literally just brought it up, and I would say that the strong connections and bonds that the characters share are pretty endearing throughout the entirety of the story, even though I feel as many of the characters don't get as much screen time as they deserve. You can definitely tell that there's some strong connection shown when they're on screen together, and Josuke's entire motivation throughout much of the story is to ensure that the safety of his past selves' families are entirely fine. But something I did want to bring up that I think is rather peculiar is the end chapter. So I'm going to finally be talking about the final chapter of JoJolion. So if you haven't read it, make sure to read it now and come back to this video once you're finished. Alright? So, we get to see, after defeating Toru, the head doctor, everyone's fine, everyone's good, we get to see that Josuke is at the hospital still, since he just defeated him right there. And we see Josefumi's mother in the hospital parking lot. And this is a big deal in the grand scheme of things, because this is someone we are supposed to care about, since Josuke should care about them. But Josuke doesn't care about them, which I think is a really strange choice, because Josuke, someone whose entire motivation was to ensure the safety of Holly-san and make sure that she is okay and that she is able to basically function again as a normal human being, sees Josefumi's mother in the parking lot and she's fine. She didn't really notice anything peculiar about Josuke. And I think this is really odd, personally. I feel as though having Josuke become this sort of new person is a great thing. I think it's a really great thing that he's finally able to be accepting of himself, but it feels kind of weird that he almost felt apathetic to seeing her. But that's just me, obviously. Many people could have interpreted that in a different way, but I felt as though that moment was very out of character for Josuke, since he's shown such a connection to ensuring Holly-san's safety. Now, the end of the story, which shows that Josuke and Yasuo are hanging out with the Higashikata family, showing that many of them are okay, which is, expected for the story. It shows that they are trying to really just cope with all the tragedy that has happened around them thanks to Toru. And I think it's pretty compelling, I'm not gonna lie. You can clearly tell that some damage has been done on the family, and they're really, really shaken up about it because of the loss of Jobin and Narisuke's immense pain that he went through. Personally, I was kind of shocked that Narisuke came out alive at all. So, personally, seeing that this family is just so broken, and the way that they cope is to finally accept Josuke into the family, I felt was really a nice moment. Because Josuke, he's been searching for this family throughout the entire story, and having him, at the end, finally be accepted into the family, I felt was a pretty good way of ending the story. And something I also quite enjoyed, but did not expect whatsoever, was the true end of the story, which is when Yasuo, instead of staying with the family, just leaves. I thought it was actually really, really kind of interesting, because Araki has been building up this story to have a strong connection between Josuke and Yasuo, showing that, there's a strong connection between them. They've been sort of deemed as like this pairing throughout the entire story. And I think it's a really neat bookend that Yasuo brings Josuke to this family, and when Josuke is finally accepted into this family, she leaves. I thought that was pretty interesting and, personally, very unexpected. But what do I think about Part 8 as a whole? Personally, I felt there were many moments and characters underutilized in the story. The main villain was very lackluster compared to other JoJo villains, and the main characters I did not develop much of an attachment for. And that sounds incredibly negative, but I really did enjoy it. I know how crazy that must seem, but I did really enjoy it. I didn't even mention the fights in the latter half that all felt very, 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 very similar, and was a grind on a monthly schedule. Yet, somehow, I still enjoyed this. And it's not just because it was JoJo's, it's because there were characters that I really cared about. I was invested in the characters. There were some characters I felt definitely got some screen time that were not as developed, or Araki wrote them in a way that I stopped caring about them. Specifically, Yasuo with her constant death flags. that was horrible. That was so horrible. But there were so many aspects of the story that I enjoyed, specifically Jobin, Tsurugi, Kato, Norisuke, Josuke's initial motivation to save Holly. There were just a lot of great moments in the story, and I really liked the early half of the story, specifically the beginning to Damo Tamaki, which is the parts that I did not read monthly. I basically caught up to them instantaneously. Essentially, as soon as I started reading it monthly, it felt like a grind, like a slog almost. So, my experience reading it monthly definitely has shaped my view on the part, but I feel as though there are some moments, specifically Yasuo's death flags, that would have bothered me just as much, or maybe even more, if I was reading this binging all the way through. But yeah, JoJolion really was a journey. I want to give this ending some more time to soak in, and let me really sort of explore the story now that it's fully completed. I just wanted to give you this video because it was my initial thoughts of the ending and my thoughts of the part as it stands right now, and we'll see if my mind changes eventually in the future. And before I finish the video, I want to say I assumed Araki would have stopped after this part because he's getting up there in age, just to put it incredibly bluntly. He is definitely getting much older than many other mangaka currently making work. So, seeing that part 9 is actually coming, I'm excited. I'm definitely curious to see where Araki takes us next, and I'm eager to go on that journey as well. And actually from the beginning, which is something I've never done before. So, hopefully you all enjoyed, and I would love to know your thoughts on the story as well, since collectively we just all finished this massive journey. If you didn't read JoJolion, I'm not sure why you watched this video, in all honesty, but hopefully you enjoyed it anyway. And if this gets you somehow invested in the story, even though I was being incredibly critical, I'm glad, and I would love to know your thoughts as well. So yeah, that's it from me. Have a good one, and thanks, Araki.